Alright, hello and welcome to another episode of Tiny Flame Rob Debugs You to Sleep. This is a video I recorded and spent way too much time editing, so I'm just going to add it and release it because I want to be done with it. The video is about me debugging and my debugging process, and as I debug I cover just my thought process and how you should approach debugging, or at least how I approach debugging. It's not very eventful, it's a pretty dry video, but I mean, how fun can you make debugging really, right? It's more of a chore than anything else. But hopefully this is educational. The reason I think it's worth releasing is that I know a lot of people who want to make their own video games or just write programming in general. They reach a point where they do all the tutorials and they get their final artifact finished, and they're pretty happy with it, but as soon as they want to start making their own stuff, they run up into like a bug or a problem, and they just don't really know how to problem solve to fix it, and they kind of give up. And I think that's a big shame. So hopefully, like, there's some tips in here that people can use, and then they can use it in their own projects and hopefully actually build cool stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The debugging thought processes that I cover here are going to be pretty lightweight and pretty beginner friendly. I know in Unity and other game engines you can hook up your own debugging software, or you can hook up a debugger and use breakpoints, and you can do things like run breakpoints, step in, step over into code and stuff like this, but that's pretty in-depth. I mean, I guess you could argue that it's good practice if you're a programmer, but if you're just an indie game dev or somebody who's just tinkering around with game engines and wants to make games, that's overkill, and in my opinion you don't really need to know about it. So I don't cover any of that. I cover mostly the basic things that you'll be running into when you're trying to debug a problem in a game engine. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy. Catch you later. Bye. So we start by creating our game object that we're going to be making use of for the hover panel. I create a raw image, and then I attach a bunch of child components that are text components to that image, so that I can basically build a little information panel. The way I'm resizing the game object text components here is going to cost us a whole bunch of time in the future, but we'll get into that a bit later. For now, everything's just being resized and I'm just building out the panel. It's basically some setup for all the things we're going to be manipulating with our code in a little bit. I fast forward to this bit because it's a bit boring and tedious. So now once the panel's built, we are going into our minimap manager, the class that's going to be managing everything, and we write some boilerplate code. What we're doing here is we're going to be hooking up that UI element we just built into the code by using this hover panel. You can see there in the start we're calling it and we're using it there. Well, we're looking it up there, so by looking at the child. I copy paste some on mouse over code that I have somewhere else, and I'm attaching that to the station select code, and that's going to be attached to the actual station UI component. So when we click or hover over the station, that's when we want to trigger events, and those events will live in this minimap manager. One of the most important functions that's basically going to be this entire video is the show info panel. Later I rename it, but for now it's called show info panel. And basically what this is going to be a little toggle menu. It's going to be pretty basic. It's just we pass in true or false, and if we pass in true, we set the panel to be visible, and if we pass false, then we hide the panel. So we'll just be using this from the FD select class, FD select logic class, to basically call into this manager function to just toggle the panel on or off. It's something that I've done countless times in my projects and it's always worked. So I was quite surprised when it didn't work this time, but that's what happens when you try and write code when you're very sleep deprived and tired from work. So basically I'm just looking up how to do the active self thing here. Something that I recommend is if you've written the code before, just look up how you did it before. Don't it just saves on time, I guess. So what we're doing here is we're saying if the panel is already or is visible, then we set it to false. It's pretty much, I guess it's a bit of a pedantic check, but I just want to make absolutely sure that we only ever set the panel to be false if it's ever set to true. I suppose in theory I could do the same for the top F statement, but I think I do that in the future anyway. And what we do now is we call into that minimap manager, and we are doing the toggle menu, so show info panel, and we're setting it to true. So when we mouse over our station UI element, we want to call into the minimap manager and we want to set it to true. And then on mouse exit, so when our mouse cursor leaves the panel, we hide the panel. Pretty basic stuff, right? Yeah, just I do make some syntax errors here and there, missing semicolons and stuff, but I think there's one more issue. Yeah, I'll fix that real quick. I hope. Let's go. You can do it. I believe in you. Oh yeah, so this is a problem with copy pasting code, right? That's a copy paste error. Like obviously we don't need all that stuff, so I clean it up. So we basically have our all the bits we need to get the panel to show up. So I've done this so many times before, so I'm not expecting anything crazy to happen. But like a couple things, crazy things will happen, right? So the first bug is pretty straightforward. Oh yeah, so I fast forward this bit because I forgot to attach the scripts to the game objects, right? We need to attach the minimap manager to the minimap, and we need to attach the station logic to the actual station UI component. So I just did that there real quick. So that's the white box is the station component, the station logic. So when I hover over that white box, what I'm supposed to be seeing is a panel pop up, but it's not. The green box that I'm hovering over right now is the exit or close menu button, and that you can actually see is working correctly. So I guess a good debug tip here is to always cross-reference. I could have saved a lot of time here with debugging if I know for a fact that the close button works, right? So what I should be doing here is I should be going and looking at the code in the close button, say like, well, how am I doing it there, and why is my one not working? And then I'll cross-reference and see pretty quickly what I did wrong. But my brain is running on fumes at the moment, at that time, so I don't think about doing that, unfortunately. But we'll see how we fix it in a bit. So in the next bit, to help with debugging, I set my variable to public. So this is another debug tip in Unity specifically. It's good practice to set variables to serializable rather than public, but because I'm kind of self-taught with the Unity engine, I've got a bunch of bad habits, and this is one of them. I set variables to public, and that's just so that I can expose them to the editor, so that I can see them in the editor. But the better way to do that is again to use serializable, but I just use public here. And the reason for this is I want to make absolutely sure that the game object that I'm looking up, you can see in that start function I'm looking up child object 8, I believe. I want to make sure that child object 8 is actually the object I think it is, because if you look things up by index, it's very easy to get things wrong and accidentally hook up the incorrect game object. I've had that happen quite a lot with complex scenes. So that's what I'm testing here. So we go to our canvas and we should go to the city map, which has the minimap manager attached to it. If I can find it, there it is. And we can see, yeah, no, sure enough, it's the hover panel that we built. It's being correctly looked up and attached. So that's not a problem. We can click on it and we can see it there. So that's not why this is happening. Mousing over still doesn't show anything. So we dive back into the station select logic and the minimap manager code. For some reason my brain remembers I need to make use of enter handlers. I need to make use of the event system, or like the handler system, because that's just what I've always done. And I'm surprised that, you know, because I'm basically to spoil it, like the bug is because I'm using the wrong functions, right? I'm not supposed to be using on mouse over. I'm supposed to be using on pointer enter and on pointer exit. On mouse over and on mouse exit works for objects in 3D space, but if you're interfacing with user interface components, you need to use on pointer click and the events system that goes with it. So what my half asleep brain here is trying to do is it's trying to like say you should use that instead. But I don't do that. I kind of go on like a bit of a Google spree, which is always good. I guess the debug takeaway here is always read the documentation, you know, RTFM, because it's pretty good documentation and you'll figure out what's going wrong here. Always read the most up-to-date documentation as well. Don't do what I'm doing right now, which is reading the wrong document, the old documentation. But once I saw this code, I kind of refamiliarized. My brain clicked and I was like, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. So I still don't really. I think so. What I'm thinking here is like I just need to use the Unity Engine UI library. I don't need the event systems library. But that's incorrect. I need the event systems because that's what all the iPointer handlers make use of, right? I try and figure that out though by reading the docs and like looking in these things a bit more deeply. But I decide, you know what, I'm just going to test it without that library just to see what happens. I mean, worst case, it doesn't work, and I just have to add it. So I think what I'm doing here is I'm just having a look at... why am I just selecting the on point? I'm just selecting the on point enter. Oh, just because I want to copy paste and replace the on mouse over. I really should install the syntax tools for this so that it can I can just type and it pops up and I can just tab into things. But you know, for now I just copy paste everything. It's been working so far, so you know, if it ain't broke, then fix it, I guess. So I'm hopeful that things will work better now, but I get a huge amount of errors. And that's, like I said earlier, where we do need the event system because that's what the handlers use, and that's why the documentation points it out. So with that added in, we recompile. I did do some heavy editing to try and make these compile times, you know, I just edited out the super long compile times. So we replaced it, we've got on pointer enter now. I still don't know why we use the UI library, so I comment that out. And we go and test to see if we can see anything happening. So ignore the null pointer, that's for something different. And we fixed the bug, so our panel is popping up now, which is great, but some weirdness is happening where it's flickering like crazy for some reason. And I've never seen this before. So I'm already like, oh, that's kind of strange, why is that happening? And I immediately think like I've probably written some silly code somewhere, or my toggle function isn't correct or something, so I go to investigate. First thing I look at is the documentation again to make sure that I'm using the function correctly. Just because, specifically the action, the exit handler. So unfortunately, unlike last time, reading the documentation this time isn't super useful. And I didn't quite realize just how this bug was going to ruin my day. I spent hours debugging this, and it was the dumbest thing ever. Like I said, if you saw the first bit where I said like this is going to cost us a lot of time, you can probably figure out what went wrong. But if you don't, just stick around and we'll go through it. I just want to show my thought process anyway. So what I'm doing here is I'm disabling the on pointer exit code, just because my gut's telling me it's the exit, right? Because for some reason exit's being called when it shouldn't be called, and that's what's making that flickering happen. So I look up some more, I do some more googling just as like a last ditch effort to see if there's any useful documentation which covers specifically the pointer event data when you're exiting out of a game object, or a UI object I should say. Can't see too much though. Something I do see in the documentation though is it's mentioning like a rect being important, or the rect being important for the event data, right, or the mouse pointer data. So what I do is I go and look for station game object to make sure that the rect is configured correctly on it, but I'm foolishly looking at the wrong issue. This isn't the game object, that's the issue. The rect is fine on it. And I suppose the debug tip there is that it's important to not get tunnel visioned. If you stare at a problem for too long, especially with programming, you can end up thinking this is the problem and it has to be this object because this is the only thing that could be going wrong. But it's important to try and like keep the bigger picture in mind. But because I have tunnel vision, it costs me an extra couple hours. So the next thing I do is, as I said, I believe it's the on-exit code, and so I remove it and I read, this is what I'm retesting currently. So the on-exit code's gone, and I hover over, and sure enough there's no flickering, right, because the on-exit event isn't happening when I hover over the station. Cool, pretty happy with that. So I go and I look in a bit more depth at the minimap managers function, the toggle function that we wrote that enables the panel, the show info panel, and I'm trying to see. Well, basically, I'm just going through the logic to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. And like as I said earlier, I'm being incredibly pedantic here, and I'm setting. You know, if the panel is not active, then make it active, and only make it active if the panel isn't set. So I want basically to try and get as much control over this incredibly simple function as I can, because for some reason it's not working correctly. And also I re-enable the exit just to get back to the basic thing, the basic workflow that we had before. I'm kind of trying to show here how I debug normally and problem solve normally is I try and pick things apart and dig. You know, you start at one thing and then you look a bit deeper and a bit deeper. You can see the bug still happens here. Quite annoying. Like so that's like, yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening, and I wish it wasn't, but it is. So yeah, it is what it is. So the next thing I'm going to try is just something incredibly wild, and I'm cringing at that fact. So my brain says, look, it's calling exit over and over again, so maybe there's like some type of frame thing, because when we ran the test it ran like over 200 times. It called on pointer exit and on pointer enter over 200 times in like under a couple seconds, which is crazy. So maybe it runs per frame for some reason. So I should be explicit and kind of use what I do with the update when I use the update function and add like a boolean to make sure that it only runs once. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding like a boolean to say, okay, look, if it's not been run before, then run it that one time and then never again. So if it's not been run before, if not has set, then I go has set equals true. So we've set it once. And then in the on pointer exit, I will reset things, right? So when on pointer exit triggers, has set will be set to false, and then we can go again. So this is normally how I manage the update function to when I only want to trigger something once. But obviously, as we'll see shortly, this doesn't really fix things, because, I mean, why would it? Nowhere in the documentation did it say that the on pointer enter and exit runs per frame, so it only runs once, right? Another thing that we actually also do here is we rename the function to be a bit more user-friendly. The show info panel is we change it to say toggle info panel, and just because this is a toggle, right, we can call it with true or false and it'll set the info panel appropriately. So that's just a minor change that I'm making to make things a bit more clear. I think I'm just trying to buy time because I don't want to test this thing. But yeah, so I do test to see if setting it, forcing it to only be set once fixes things. Apologies again for all the compiling. This is why like compiling languages are not great. Sometimes you have to just wait constantly if you're testing things. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work. I guess the debug tab here is to test constantly. Because currently, my thinking currently is this: the on pointer exit function, something's happening with it. That's what my hunch is telling me, because the menu does activate properly, it just deactivates, and then it reactivates properly because the mouse is hovered over the station, and then it deactivates again for some reason. So exit is being called for some reason, which is causing the flickering to happen. And you can see there are over like a couple of hundred events being called. So yeah, something's up with the on pointer exit function, and I have no idea what it is. So because I was feeling like a special little idiot that day, I decided to copy paste directly from the docs, just because I'm trying to figure out here, is this a Unity problem or is this a me being dumb problem? Because right now I'm thinking if it is the onExit function, like I don't have control over that, right? It's a Unity function, so like, yeah, I'd have to figure out what on earth is happening there. But if it's a me problem, well, I have some control over myself, so I can try and figure out what's going on. So it's pretty basic, just directly from the documentation. We're testing to see if this works. And when we go to the little train terminal, again, ignore the null pointers, that's for pathfinding for a different part of the game. And hey, look at that, it actually works. We hover over it, let me just clear all that. We hover over it and we hover off it, and it works correctly. So it's definitely a me problem. So at this point I'm pretty confused and I have no idea what's going on, and I'm questioning my life choices, but at least we're making some sort of progress. So I just spent some time cleaning up after myself. I think here I just re-enable the UI library, or I disable the UI library. I removed that boolean we don't use, you know, that one we wrote to set the frame thing to run once. We don't need that because that's not how those functions run anyways, so we just remove it. I'm trying to just eliminate all of the other variables that I added in, which didn't fix anything. Just some housekeeping. And then afterwards, obviously, I test to make sure that nothing I just changed the state of things, so that, you know, it helps with the debugging.
Debugging.
So, since we know it's a me issue, what I'm doing here is I'm just taking out the copy-pasted code from the documentation and I'm putting my code back in. So now we know it's me. We can look at the actual functions to see what's going on here. I'm removing the has set booleans. I'm making sure that we're setting the toggle panel to true and false in the correct place. We also have the manager function called setStation there, which sets the current station that we're looking at. And so after that, I go back into the boolean function, the toggle info panel function, and I make sure that everything there looks okay. So this is just me staring into the abyss for a little while. I'm working through the logic of the function because it's the strangest thing. It's such a simple function, and like I get it, and it should work, and this should be fine. But then it's some weird behavior is happening when I call this function, right? Because this is the only function that would show the panel or hide the panel. So in this onPointerEnter function, that's the only thing that could be causing this problem. And looking at the code, it seems fine to me. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm being really stupid today, and I should have just not started this. I should have just done this tomorrow. So now I do a quick test, because remember, we made some changes, even though they're minor. So I just want to test to make sure everything's still okay. And much like myself, this function is consistently a problem because it's still happening. So now what I do is, this is a pretty silly little test, but I'm just going to comment out all of the Minimap Manager functions, right? I'm only going to have like debug. So what I'm trying to achieve here is like the process of elimination. I'm trying to remove absolutely, like bit by bit, I'm trying to remove and add back in things like as slowly as I can, so that I could help track or narrow down exactly where these functions are starting to misbehave. That's the debug tip here, is to use process of elimination, remove variables one by one and then test after every single removal, or add them back in when you remove them one by one and then run tests constantly to see where it is. And by doing so, you'll narrow down the problem area or the problem space, and you'll be able to figure out what's going on. As we can see, this is working now with just debug. So what I do in this next part is I re-add just for the onPointerEnter, I re-add the Minimap Manager toggle panel, toggle info panel function. And what I'm trying to see is like, is it the onPointerEnter or the onPointerExit? Because currently I thought it was the onPointerExit, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to hover over this and see if the flicker or anything strange happens. So we hover over it, and something strange kind of does happen. It runs only once for some reason, and never again, which is strange because it should run more than once, right? Every time we enter, it should be triggering that. So yeah, I think we do the test again, just to make absolutely sure, because at this point my brain is fried and I'm like, this is weird, like this is unexpected behavior here. And also it's calling both blah and blue, which is like both onPointerEnter and onPointerExit. So again, I'm questioning my life choices here. I really should have like some better variable or debug names, but you know, I didn't really think I'd be recording this, so normally when I debug I just put in whatever just to remember what is what. I know what blah and blue means. So I think what I do here is I retest by because this behavior is like so strange. I'm retesting to see if it happens if I remove the toggle info panel function to see what, you know, if it's still an issue or not. So yeah, just doing a quick retest, hover over things to make sure that, I think I just wanted to see something working at this point. Yeah, everything works because I'm only printing the debug text. So the strange behavior is definitely it's definitely coming from the toggle panel info. So I'll go back to the code, make changes again, like put it back to the way it was. I think I test again. I mean, you should test frequently, but I think I test a bit too much. But you know, I guess this is a bit OCD, but I want to just make absolutely sure I understand what's happening here. Yeah, happens again. So now I'm confused and I don't know where else to go from here, but one additional test I want to do is I want to test the get station function as well, just to make sure that that one's okay and not causing any problems. I also write like a comment to my future self so that if I decide to just walk away from my computer, I can come back and I can remember where I was and I can, you know, continue to debug things. And yeah, sometimes writing down comments, it's helpful to kind of start thinking about other things that you could try, right? So that's kind of a little debug tip, I suppose, as well. Like, write comments about how your code works, sure, but also if there's any bugs while you're debugging, write some comments as well, because it's good to have that to fall back on if you need it. So this is me testing the get station function in the minimap manager, and I'm hopeful that we don't see any flickering or strange weirdness. And everything works okay, so I'm pretty happy and confident that that function is okay. At least it's just the toggle panel info function that's causing a problem, thankfully, I guess. So I update my comment to reflect that as well. So I say specifically it's the toggle info panel function. So in this next bit I do not some cleanup but some simplification, because I'm like, if this thing's broken anyway in the exact same way, then these pedantic checks that I added in the additional if statements aren't really that useful. So I'm going to remove them to keep things simple, just so that I can remember, just so that I can work through it easier or more easily, you know. I don't need to make sure that the things are set as they are when I know they are. And I re-enable the toggle info panel function so that I can start debugging it. And I obviously, because we made changes, I retest to make sure that everything works the way I think. The bug should now rehappen or reoccur, and it does. Both of the on pointer enter and on pointer exit are being called for some reason. It should only be on pointer enter. So what I'm going to be doing here now is I'm going to be so now we know that toggle info panel is the problem, right? It's somehow it's causing on pointer, it's causing true and false to be returned at the same time for some reason. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking more in depth at it, but rather than the logic, because we've been over the logic like 3 times now, I'm going to just remove the hover panel being set active, because my thinking here is maybe the game object itself is broken in some way, even though it is just an image. Maybe something happened, so I'm just going to add debugging text here to see. So I guess a big debug tip is always just print debug text when it's the most simple thing to use. So we test to see if our changes give us anything new, so that we can progress further with the debugging. And I should have cut out more of this compiling shenanigans. This takes so long. Alright, cool, we're there. We're gonna be testing things. I'm just kinda, yeah, waiting for the text to go. Okay, now I'll test it. And we can see that it's working now. It's not calling both the exit or the true and false states. It's not calling blah and blue at the same time, and it's not just working once, it's working consistently. And so we've managed to dig a bit deeper here. So now we know, okay, it's not necessarily the toggle info panel, it's the game object that the toggle info panel is making use of here. And I go and I update my comment so that I know if I go away for a snack or something where I am with this. And it's good to keep tabs as I go step by step, deeper and deeper, digging down. Yeah, cool. So that should be good. I type very slowly. But yeah, cool. That's the next step that we do. But because I test constantly, the next thing I'm doing is like I'm just going to leave the debug text there, but I'm going to re-enable everything in the minimap manager on the minimap manager side, and the station logic side. So I'm going to, if you look at the on pointer exit, I'm going to re-enable the minimap manager's toggle info panel there as well, and then I'm going to run a retest to make sure that, you know, I didn't accidentally misthink about anything and it's actually the on pointer exit function that's causing the problem. Again, you know, like I kind of repeat myself a lot here, but it's important. Like I constantly rerun tests to make sure that every single small minute change, I know exactly what's happening with it. Just because if you don't do that, as when I started writing code, when I didn't do that, I started going in circles because, you know, the environment's constantly changing. And sure enough, everything works okay, right? So that's good news, I suppose. We're getting closer to what the problem is here. So what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to slowly be adding back the hover panel information, starting with the hover panel set active to true. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm bit by bit want to start adding things back so that I can see where exactly the hover panel is going wrong. Or how it's going wrong. So the hover panel to true, so whenever we hover over the station, it should be set. And we make tests, or we run tests again, right? So we're going to test it to see what happens and to see if our theory holds up. So this should be broken now, if everything works the way we think it does. Or maybe it doesn't, then it's like the other hover panel's clause, we'll see. I'm waiting for the train to stop just because it's annoying with its whenever it hits the station, there's debug output, so I'm just trying to get rid of it. But there's still debug output, there's just too much debug output. But so when I hover over it, we can see that both the true and the false clauses are being called at the same time and only once, which is like impossible. Like how is that even happening, right? The code should not allow this to happen. And I feel incredibly stupid at this moment trying to debug. Literally all I'm doing in the info panel is setting the state to be true. So I'm incredibly confused as to what is happening here. Again, this is like a very elementary like toggle info panel. I've written one like hundreds of times before and this has never happened to me. So I'm kind of at my wit's end and I have no idea what's going on. So yeah, I decided to go back and update my comments again. So I go back and I update my comments to say, is this like an event systems thing? Because at this point I'm thinking it's the event systems, or am I just being dumb? Needless to say, I'm being very dumb this day, so yeah, it wasn't an event systems thing, as we'll see in a minute. So now that we know it's the hover panel, something else I think of doing is just replacing the hover panel game object with another game object. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm shifting game objects around because we look up game object with index 8. So now index 8 is the you are here, the pink little you are here pointer. So we're going to see if the you are here pointer flickers now, because if it does, it means it's a Unity game engine problem. But if it doesn't, it means it's a me problem. And something in my code, or I think in my code, is not working. And sure enough, when we run our test, we can see it works fine. We hover over the station and it's visible. We hover our mouse off the station and it's not visible. So this is not a Unity engine bug. This is nothing to do with Unity functions, or it's just me being silly. I do this test again later on with the exit button. I think you can see me moving it here. So just to double check, you know, multiple game objects, because it's oftentimes it's good to, like, you know, test as many different cases as you can rather than just one case. You know, have a big sample set if you can. It's always a good idea. And yeah, sure enough, it works. We can see whenever we hover over the station, our exit button is there. Whenever we hover off of it, it hides itself. So now I re-add the hover panel back to index 8, so it's back to the way it was, and I see if the bug happens again. Obviously it should happen again, but at this point I'm so lost, I just want to make sure. And yeah, it happens again, so we can see that. So at this point, now that we know it's the hover panel, I go back and I write some comments for myself, just in case I go and take another break. I've been taking little mini breaks in between all this debugging. At this point I've been debugging for about 4 hours. One thing that I do notice though is the hover panel has child objects, whereas the other game objects we just tested didn't have child objects. So that's the only difference in game object that I can see. at the time, and I kind of add that into the comments that I'm writing here as maybe something else we can go investigate. But then I go and treat myself to a sweet treat because I needed it. Okay, so when I come back, I rerun the tests to make sure that everything still behaves the way we think it does, and it does. And we've narrowed it down to that one game object. And so I have a look at the game object itself, right? Not even the code, just the hover panel game object. And I disable all the children. So it's exactly like the other game objects we tested, with no children in it, and I rerun my tests. And we can see from the test that it's working. Like, the panel shows up and the panel goes away. So when disabling the children, the panel stops flickering. So by the process of elimination, like removing everything and testing only one thing at a time, we've managed to see that, okay, something in the children game objects on the hover panel is causing a problem. So now I re-enable one child object. So my plan here was to go through every single child object one by one to test them all separately, but I don't really need to, because when we rerun our test, we can see that the error happens again. And wouldn't you know it, when I look at this child object to see how it's created, I notice that the anchor points are way off on the object. Those white bars, they shouldn't be there. They should be sized correctly. And I'm like, why? How did that happen? When did that happen? So I recreate them all, because as you can see, there are yellow lines and white lines, and the yellow lines that I foolishly thought were the anchor points because I wasn't paying attention, because I'm so tired of doing UI work. The yellow lines are margins for the text. They're not anchor points. The anchor points are the white lines with the little blue dots. So I remake all the child objects just from scratch, and I make sure that I set the anchor points and not the margins this time. And I get ready to retest things. Quite annoyed with myself at this point. So we run a final test to see if that was the issue, and to see if everything works now. So we go and we hover over it, and hey, look at that, we have a panel. That was totally worth 5 hours of debugging, wasn't it? Cool, so that was the problem. The problem at the end of the day, it wasn't the code at all, it was my game object with how I set things. So I go back now and I remove all my comments because I fixed the bug, and I set the code back to the way it was, and everything works out okay. So in conclusion, programming sucks, and I can't wait for AI to replace me. Okay, thanks, bye.